The third part of this presentation on tracking the progress of the stroke survivor's recovery journey looks in more detail at the proposed Stroke Quality of Life Survey. In particular, it looks at the structure and procedures of the survey and at what actions can be initiated automatically or manually with the stroke survivor's responses to the survey. I will now briefly outline the procedures which could determine when and how stroke survivors would be asked to complete the Stroke Quality of Life Survey. Firstly, the Stroke Quality of Life Survey should be completed as part of the hospital discharge process in order to establish a baseline for subsequent monitoring of community-based recovery. Then, the Stroke Quality of Life Survey should be completed periodically according to a planned schedule, which might be several times in the first 6 months post-discharge, then every 3 months up to 2 years post-discharge, and then every 6 months until a satisfactory quality of life is achieved by the stroke survivor. The Stroke Quality of Life Survey should be completed using the Stroke Rehab app on an iPad or an equivalent application running on a desktop or notebook computer. But to ensure that most, if not all, stroke survivors can complete the survey, it is important to provide a number of options, such as individual stroke survivors using the iPads issued to them on discharge from hospital, as described elsewhere in these presentations. Stroke survivors could be assisted by their carers or family members if necessary. Members of community-based stroke support groups could complete the survey on behalf of other members who don't feel confident enough to use the iPad app. Members of staff at subacute hospitals could complete the survey on behalf of past patients. Stroke liaison officers employed by the National Stroke Foundation could complete the survey on behalf of their clients. Community health centre staff or community-based therapists could complete the survey on behalf of their patients. Or GPs or staff at medical clinics could complete the survey on behalf of their patients. Once the Stroke Quality of Life Survey has been completed, there are 2 opportunities to analyse the stroke survivor's responses. Firstly, survey results could be analysed immediately in the iPad itself using local rules defined by stroke specialists. These local rules could trigger local workflows, including explanation workflows that provide specific information in the form of videos, podcasts, or books that are relevant to a specific response. For example, information relevant to a stroke survivor who is concerned about his or her ability to make decisions. Then there may be testing workflows that provide standard tests of specific abilities that can be administered using the features of the iPad. And there are response workflows that define specific actions depending on choices made. For example, stroke specialists may want to establish a video conference call with the stroke survivor if they respond to a particular question in a particular way. Secondly, when survey results are sent back to the central database, they can be analysed using additional central rules defined by stroke specialists. These central rules could trigger central workflows, including automatically advising treating therapists of significant changes in a stroke survivor's responses, automatic referrals to stroke specialists for further interpretation of responses and appropriate actions, the suggestion of changes in therapies or therapists based on accumulated knowledge stored in the stroke recovery database, or the suggestion of the need for therapist appointments or video calls. Furthermore, survey schedules for individual stroke survivors could be maintained on the central database and reminders issued automatically to survivors and/or the people who are nominated to help stroke survivors complete the survey. Finally, over time, survey results will build up a comprehensive stroke recovery knowledge base containing invaluable information for healthcare administrators in both hospital and community settings, therapy, research and development scientists and stroke clinicians, and medical profession educators. I will now go briefly through some of the ICF codes included in the Basic Learning Abilities section of the ICF framework to illustrate the sorts of disability items that will end up in the Mental Abilities section of the Stroke Quality of Life Survey. For example, we have the disability item called Copy Things, which corresponds with ICF code D130, or the ability to imitate or mimic, such as copying a gesture, a sound, or the letters of an alphabet. There is the disability item called Rehearse Things, which corresponds with ICF code D135, or the ability to repeat a sequence of events or symbols, such as counting by 10 or practicing the recitation of a poem. And the disability item called Read Text, which corresponds with ICF code D140, or the ability to read written material with fluency and accuracy, such as recognizing characters and alphabets, sounding out words with correct pronunciation, and understanding words and phrases. Then there is the disability item called Write Text, which corresponds with ICF code D145, or the ability to produce symbols that represent sounds, words, or phrases in order to convey meaning, such as spelling effectively and using correct grammar. Then there is the Calculate disability item, which corresponds with ICF code D150, or the ability to manipulate numbers and perform simple and complex mathematical operations, such as using mathematical signs for addition and subtraction and applying the correct mathematical operation to a problem. There is the disability item called Manipulate Tools, which corresponds with the ICF code D1550 and described as the ability to perform basic purposeful actions, such as the manipulation of eating utensils, a pencil, or a simple tool. Then there is the disability item called Follow Rules, which corresponds with ICF code D1551, or the ability to perform integrated sets of actions so as to follow rules and to sequence and coordinate one's movements, such as playing games like cards or using a tool like a hammer. There are more disability items within this group, but this gives an idea of the sorts of things that become part of the Stroke Quality of Life survey. I will now briefly describe the 5 questions that will be asked in each section of the Stroke Quality of Life survey, such as the Basic Sensory Abilities section, illustrated here. Here we see a screenshot of question 1, as it might be presented on a personal computer. It determines if the stroke survivor needs to answer questions 2 to 5 in the current section or can simply skip to the next section of the survey. Here we see a screenshot of question 2, which asks about the survivor's level of concern about disability items in the current survey section. Note how the survivor is able to click a button to receive a better explanation of the meaning of the question or the disability item. Here we see a screenshot of question 3, which asks about the survivor's perception of changes, either deterioration or improvement, for disability items in the current survey section. The survivor is able to click a button to invoke a computer-aided test for a specific disability item. Here we see a screenshot of question 4, which asks about the survivor's priority of action for disability items in the current survey section. And finally, here we see a screenshot of question 5, which asks about the psychological impact on the survivor of disability items in the current survey section. I mentioned earlier the concept of disability concern, which measures the level of concern expressed by the stroke survivor by individual stroke-related disabilities. Well, this slide illustrates how this measure can be extremely valuable in conveying clear, consistent and meaningful information to stroke survivors and carers about their stroke recovery progress, and to all treating therapists and medical professionals. The graph shown here is for purely illustrative purposes and does not represent actual data. It shows the disability concern measure for 8 of the disability groupings covered by the Stroke Quality of Life Survey. The disability concern measurement is calculated by summing the products of the scores given by the stroke survivor to the level of concern question and the relative priority question. Scores of 0 indicate that the survivor is unconcerned about a particular disability, while a score of 20 would indicate the survivor has extreme concern about a particular disability and needs urgent action on it. The graph contains 5 sets of disability concern measures. The blue line being the disability concern measurement at the time of discharge, and the red line being the most recent disability concern measurement. The grey lines indicate previous disability concern measurements. The graph illustrates 4 different aspects of this hypothetical stroke survivor's recovery. First, it shows that while the survivor has a slight concern about sensory disabilities at the time of discharge, those concerns no longer exist. So either the sensory problems have resolved themselves over time, or any treatments for sensory disabilities were successful. Second, it shows that the survivor's concern about mental disabilities, though not major, are slowly increasing, suggesting that something should be done about that. Third, it shows that the survivor's concern about task performance, communication, mobility, and self-care disabilities are still present, but are quickly resolving themselves. So any treatments for those areas of disability are being successful. Fourth, it shows that the survivor's concern about domestic life and interpersonal abilities, though not initially a major concern, are rapidly becoming of concern and require considerable attention from appropriate therapists or medical professionals. Because all treating therapists and medical professionals would have access to this sort of information, they can all quickly get a picture of the stroke survivor's recovery journey and see where their particular expertise and services fit into the overall recovery process. It also makes it clear what problem areas need to be given priority and what problem areas are becoming less important. I will now take this disability concern analysis down one level, from the disability grouping level to the disability item level. This graph looks at the individual disability items in the mental abilities group. Of course, other disability groups can be broken down to this level as well, but only some therapists would be interested in going down to this level. This graph shows the disability concern measure for 7 of the disability items in the mental abilities group. As before, the graph contains 5 sets of disability concern measures, the blue line being the disability concern measurement at the time of discharge, and the red line being the most recent disability concern measurement. The graph shows 4 different aspects of this hypothetical stroke survivor's recovery. First, it shows that the ability to copy things, or ICF code D130, has never been of concern. Second, it shows that while the ability to rehearse things, ICF code D135, read text, ICF code D140, and the manipulate tools ability were of concern at the time of discharge, those concerns no longer exist. So either these problems resolved themselves over time, or their treatments were successful. Third, it shows that the survivor's concern about writing text is now resolving itself, either through natural recovery processes or through successful therapy. Fourth, it shows that the survivor's concern about his or her ability to calculate things or to follow rules are becoming of concern and require attention from appropriate therapists or medical professionals. Graphical presentations of the disability concerns of a stroke survivor, as illustrated here, gives the therapist responsible for treating the stroke survivor's mental disabilities a clear picture of how the survivor's needs are evolving over time. Because the Stroke Quality of Life Survey is also measuring the moods associated with these disabilities, it gives the therapist a good indication of whether the problem might be a physical problem directly caused by the stroke or a psychological problem caused by the stroke. So, in part 3 of this presentation on tracking the stroke recovery journey, I have suggested that the Stroke Quality of Life Survey should be carried out on discharge from hospital and then periodically until the survivor returns to a satisfactory quality of life. That the survey should be carried out on an iPad or an equivalent device, either by the survivor, him or herself, or by somebody trained to complete the survey in consultation with the survivor. And that the responses to the Stroke Quality of Life Survey can automatically trigger appropriate workflows on either the survivor's iPad or when the survey response is sent back to the central database. Then I showed how the ICF framework is used to generate the Stroke Quality of Life Survey questions, and finally illustrated how the responses to that survey can be used to dramatically improve the capacity of community care providers to make evidence-based decisions in treating stroke survivors in all communities throughout Australia. In conclusion, I have argued throughout this presentation that there is a drastic need to vastly improve the archaic information management in the community-based stroke care setting. Specifically, there is an urgent need to improve the capacity to collect and manage information about individual stroke survivors' recovery journeys. This will not only benefit stroke survivors and their carers, it will also benefit community care providers and community care planners and administrators. There is also a need to dramatically improve the efficiency and effectiveness of information flows throughout the community care sector, with particular benefits in regional and rural communities.